Song Revolution with John Chisum on the NRT Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, John here. Thanks for joining me again. Let's do something fun, right? We're going to be here. Let's make the most of it. And today I'm going to bring you a dear old friend of mine named David Hampton. And David and I were in the music business about 35 years ago at the same time. I was a young publisher. He was a young songwriter, and I got to work with David for a season as a music publisher back in the day. And even though we lost touch, I have reconnected with him recently and was just thrilled to hear of not only his challenging and somewhat tragic experiences as he lost his wife, Trisha, back in 2013 to MS, but how he fell into alcoholism but turned his life around and now lives to share that hope and that recovery as a professional addiction recovery coach. And so David is the author of two wonderful books. He's the co-host of the Positive Sobriety Podcast, and David and I just have a great time on this show talking and unpacking some of the things around his addiction, the loss of Trisha to MS, and how as she got sicker, so did he. And now at this point, he's dedicated his life to sharing how people can walk in long-term positive sobriety. So I know you're going to really get a lot out of David's interview today. If you're wrestling with some addiction, you can reach out to David. We share that information, but don't wait. Go get some help if you are struggling or lost in addiction. He gets very real about it. We have a lot of laughs, and this is just one of my favorite interviews ever. So sit back, enjoy meeting certified professional addiction recovery coach and one of my dear friends, David Hampton. So, right. Yeah. Well, David Hampton, welcome to the show.
It is good to be here. Thank you, John.
You and I were songwriters and publishers back 35 years ago, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been a minute, right?
Yeah, it was. It was about 35 years ago. I think we moved to Nashville in, I always have to think about it. We moved here in 87, but I was starting to come back and forth from Indiana a lot when I first met you. So that would have been probably at least 85.
Yeah.
So here we are.
And I was already at Star Song,
right? Probably
probably by the time we met.
Yeah, I was on the tail end of Arios, I think. And
Yes.
met you there, and then you were at Star Song, and of course we all got rolled over and
Exactly.
into that. And
yeah, well, Arios was a small publishing house that was started by Bill Gaither and Gary McSpadden and some other folks. And it really was kind of an interesting story because my wife Donna and I came to Nashville in 83 to take a job that fell through. And we had $40, no place to live.
oh gosh,
Wound up through a friend I don't even have anymore in my life, introduced me to Gary McSpadden. Gary listened to some songs. I guess he played them for Gaither, and they signed me to a publishing contract, which is so weird. You'd never have that happen.
Right.
These days.
Right, yeah. The formula has changed.
It has definitely changed. I mean, I was just basically off the street, throwing papers out of the car window at 3 a.m. and making $60, but I really worked hard at it and wrote 5 nights a week. And my first year had almost 20 songs recorded. So they hired me.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, this guy is aggressive. And so they hired me to work with songwriters. I didn't have any degrees. It didn't even have a bachelor's degree then.
Yeah.
I've since gotten one, but I didn't have any business degrees. I had no business doing what they wanted me to do, but man, it was great, and I wound up managing about 12 writers and placing a bunch of songs. You came along, and we became friends, and so it's been a minute ago, hasn't it?
It has. And, I always tell people, I still think, tenacity is the most important thing in this kind of pursuit as far as the creative music realm, and gosh, nowadays, we don't, people are doing pretty well who don't have publishers or record deals or anything else, and
they're almost becoming obsolete.
Yeah, and it was the Holy Grail when we were down there. I mean, that was the, that was the way it worked. And so we all really tried to find out what they wanted and give it to him.
You know, and it worked for a while till it didn't work anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole digital thing just so totally tanked, you know, the music business across the board, not just Christian music, but all over. And we were young and trying to figure it out. And remind me, I mean, back in the day, you were married to, we called her Patsy.
Yeah, you knew her as Patsy.
We knew.
She moved to Nashville and decided she really had never loved her name. And since her name was Patricia, she decided she would be Trisha Hampton.
Right,
you know?
right.
And it was funny because our first year in Nashville, we sent Christmas cards back home, you know, to Indiana where we were from. And, you know, it said David and Trisha Hampton. And we got these notes from people that said, what happened to Patsy?
Oh my gosh.
Did you get to Nashville and meet somebody else? Ditch her? And like, no, she's the same person she always was. Just using the back half of her name.
Well, I know there's a whole story around her passing and just your plummeting into alcoholism and addiction. And I want to talk about that in a moment. But on the music side, you know, you wound up really using your music for a couple of decades in the church. And talk a little bit about that before we get into the other part of your story.
Yeah, it was really an interesting time because, you know, it was one of those things where, you know, we came to Nashville like everybody else. And I just thought, you know, my goal is to make a living in music. I didn't know exactly that, you know, you topped out at, you know, at a pretty low salary at some point.
Exactly.
Unless you're in a very small fraction of, you know, the percentage.
The Stephen Curtis Chapmans.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and even as a musician, I thought, well, I'll play. I was a keyboard player, piano player. And I thought, well, if I play for artists and write, you know, I had enough encouragement from people like you and others about my writing that I thought, well, that can work. But I've got to have a gig, you know, so I'll play on the road. And Trisha was working at Vanderbilt in different capacities at that time. And we thought, well, that, you know, that'll be great. But I ended up, you know, selling furniture and working on the General Jackson as a waiter, and which is a riverboat.
Which is a boat,
Yeah, the Opryland owns or owned or something. It may have sunk by now. I don't know what happened to it. It was a riverboat cruise, and I was not a musician. I was out there serving prime rib. And, you know, so we did all that stuff. And the first year we got here, Trisha got pregnant with our daughter, Lauren. And, but I ended up traveling with a guy named, an artist, Scott Wesley Brown, from back in nearly the Jesus movement era.
Of course,
you know, and he.
Iconic.
Yeah. And I learned a lot from Scott, and he was a great resource for a lot of opportunities for writing. And, you know, just, he was very generous to me as far as being a person that worked with him. And I was always really grateful for that opportunity. And then I had the opportunity to travel with Steve Green and Michael Card and some other artists like that. And those were great opportunities, and they were great guys to me as well.
No slouchy artist.
You know,
right?
Yeah, for the time we were all in, those were really good people to be with. I mean, just good, you know, people.
Good-hearted people, very solid people.
Yeah, really great people to be around. And so we did that for a while, you know, and my daughter, became, she was about 5 years old. And my wife had been having these weird symptoms, physical symptoms, and she had had a lot of in and out from doctors, MRIs. You know, she was experiencing dizziness and then unsteadiness and clumsiness and numbness and tingling and vision problems and all these kind of things. And we had just bought a house in Franklin, and we were out walking on the bike paths, and she would get really hot and get just dizzy and kind of lose her vision. And so anyway, one thing led to another through a long series of about a couple of years of medical back and forth. She was diagnosed with MS, but by the time she was diagnosed, it was a kind of a primary progressive form of MS. And so I continued to try to travel for a while and realized that I really needed to be home. You know, there was just too much upheaval when I left. You know, I'd fly out on a Thursday and come home on a Monday morning, you know, and that would be a long enough stretch for her to lose her mind with a little kid at home by herself.
Oh, yeah,
you know,
struggling with her
just,
own disease.
Yeah, because she was getting more and more limited in her mobility and in her ability to jump up and react to something, you know, and you've got a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old, you know, going on their own little plan. You kind of have to be able to either reach out and grab them or have a big hook.
Yeah.
So we decided that I really needed to be home. And one of the things that happened was the church that I was a part of, Christ Community Church in Franklin, where we were attending, were transitioning into looking for a full-time person. And they decided it through a bunch of circumstances that would be something they would offer to me. And I took that opportunity, and it was a good opportunity. It was a good place where you're writing and you're arranging and you're people you knew who played and sang and, you know, a plethora of talent, especially in that day.
In Nashville.
It was, you know, in the 80s, it was sort of a CCM church, not to be, you know, trivializing that, but it was just known for people who went there, you know.
Scotty Smith. And
Scotty was my pastor for years and years. And so it was one of those things where it was a good opportunity, and Scotty wanted us to get our hands around and create a creative community instead of just randomly asking famous people to lead worship, you know, because that was kind of the MO prior, you know, was, well, you know, so-and-so can do it this week, and let's get Stephen Curtis this week, and maybe Ashley Cleveland's here, and she can do it next week, and Michael Card will be in town the following week, and we could do that. And
I remember those days.
Yeah, and it was great, but as far as consistency and being something that was real sustainable long term, it really was exhausting. You know, because Scotty was, I think, depending on relationships a lot more than on strategy. You know, than we had. And
it'd be easy to do with those kinds of names, you know.
It just got to be where he didn't want to have to be the guy to fill that hole every week, you know. And he said, plus we've got all these people out there who can play and sing and are aspiring, you know, in some level to do this. There's somebody's local best, you know, who came to Nashville, and we ought to be bringing those people in and creating a community of people as opposed to just having, you know, well-known people do it all the time. So that was sort of where, you know, I really was able to kind of watch my worlds come together as far as creatively, you know, my writing, arranging, playing, getting people together and creating this thing. And it really grew, and the church grew, and a lot of things were going on. But as that job got more demanding, Trisha got sicker, you know, and so she was getting more and more debilitated. So I had more demands at home. I ended up moving my office at home to my house after a few years, and working from home, except for days I had to do meetings or go to rehearsals or do things like that.
Right.
So I was home accessible a lot more. And in the process of that, I didn't know it at the time. I know I didn't know it at the time. I was becoming really emotionally exhausted, you know, after years of doing that and watching her deteriorate, really, you know, and being a caregiver, because that's a really isolating role. I mean, we could talk for a whole hour on just caregiving, you know, because you feel guilty for how you feel a lot, and you feel lonely a lot. And you don't know what you're doing. I mean, there's a crash course in a few things, but you know, you're winging it, and
24/7.
Yeah,
just
you're
never
right
stops.
there.
Yeah.
So over the course of time, she was beginning to really show a lot of debilitation. And Christ Community was a Presbyterian church, so we drank. You know, I used to think Presbyterians were just Baptists that drank. But you know, we drank pretty freely and openly.
Or they drank openly. Right?
Yeah, exactly. The openly part is probably the key. And so I, you know, had grown up not having alcohol in my home. But my parents one night, I remember when I was about 13, went to a dinner, a Christmas dinner, and my dad had been given a bottle of Kentucky bourbon, and he didn't know what to do with it because he's like, we don't drink, and I don't want to give it to somebody because I don't want to, you know, contribute to somebody else that might have a problem or whatever. And so he, I've told this story many times, but he put it in the back of the pantry, where they kept their baked goods, which I joked that now I know where Baptists keep their liquor, But he had it back there. And for whatever reason, I had a fascination with it. It was just like, having a body buried under the house. We all knew it was there. We didn't talk about it, but I was very curious about it.
Exactly.
And so I, one night that they were gone, I poured my mom had these on the rocks glasses, but she called them juice glasses because, they didn't drink, and had mallard ducks on them. It was the 70s. And I poured about half of this Seagram 7 and about half 7-Up in this on the rocks glass. And I started sipping on that. And Charlie Brown was on TV. I was in my parents' little wood panel family room, the Christmas tree on. And I began to feel relaxed, and I began to feel relief. And I was 13. I began to feel less perfectionistic. I began to feel acceptable. All these negative emotions that I carried around. I was kind of an emotionally wound tight kid. And
13, I guess so.
Yeah. I mean, I was wound tight.
Yeah.
And I was taking piano lessons at University of Evansville Preparatory School of Music. There was a lot of pressure there. There was 2 piano lessons a week and a theory class a week. And I had an ulcer when I was 15. I was, the nerd
David,
that drank my Maalox out of my locker at school. I'm not to paint a, terribly tragic picture, but it was not, I was not all grins and smiles, as a young adolescent. And this was like, this drink was like, I was experiencing this, what I used to call my warm hug from God.
Wow.
I thought, I've been lied to. I didn't get sick. I didn't act unbecomingly. I didn't get drunk. None of these terrible things happened to me when I drank this. This is going to be a part of my life, and I distinctively pressed pause in my psyche somewhere, and alcohol was going to be a part of my world, because I couldn't imagine anybody praying for peace when Bacardi sells it for $9.99. I just did.
Who needs God?
Who needs God when you could do this, And oddly enough, that was I think sort of an unspoken mantra in my head. Because as Tricia got sicker, I got sicker, I was drinking more. I was drinking at home. I was drinking privately. I was drinking in a lot of ways that I was trying to find excuses to drink, and I was having some unwanted outcomes to my drinking. I didn't get a DUI, thankfully, but there were things that were happening that were not good, and so I kept trying to quit. And, long story short, through a long series of events and circumstances, I got into a program and got into an addiction therapist, and and that was in 2005. And I mean, June 20th of 2005 was my last drink so far.
Wow.
By God's goodness and grace and all those other things. But that changed everything. Recovery changed everything, because I thought, well, my life will get more manageable now, that I'm not juggling this terrible
Did you hit a
secret.
Bottom? Did you hit like a terrible bottom that, that you're not telling us yet? Is that what's going on here?
I mean, it consisted of enough nights of waking up, having peed in the closet,
okay,
and,
all right.
thinking that the armoire was the door to the outside and trying to crawl in it, and just starting out in other rooms of the house and ending up in other rooms of the house and not knowing how you got there, and having to be told that you talked to people on the phone last night that you have no absolute recollection of doing, and you might want to know that you told so-and-so this, and you might want to know that if you encounter them today, you might want to be aware that
might be helpful to know
if they act less
what
than
you really said.
You.
Some of those filters you didn't have.
Exactly.
Let some things slip.
I'll tell you another thing, that kind of stuff.
Gosh.
Which seems to just come very freely after you've had, a few too many. But those things were just happening to me, and I was having to navigate that. I was having physical symptoms. My hands were shaking, and I was making mistakes in my playing. I just I felt horrible all the time. You know, I mean, I had all kinds of issues, and physical issues, blood pressure, and everything that goes with all that. And I knew I had tried so many times to stop, and I knew I couldn't. And I was scared. I was really frightened. And I think fear drove me to fear of losing the things that were most valuable to me. It drove me to get help. And so I did. And, but my life didn't get easier. My life got harder. You know, Trisha got sicker. She spent the last 7 years of her life in a hospital bed at home. You know, we had a skilled care nurse come in once a week to check on her, and then a nurse tech twice a week to come in and make sure she had a good bath and all that, and everything else I had to do. And, you know, she had had a colostomy and a urostomy because of the effects that MS was having on her body. And I had to be trained in that, how to handle those things. And it just was not getting easier, you know, and I had this bargain with God. I thought that, you know, I'll get sober and maybe things will stay more manageable, and they didn't, you know. And
so you have maybe a sense of disappointment there, an expectation that
a certain sense of betrayal.
I'll do this for you, God, and you do that for me, but it didn't.
Yeah.
So
It sounds very cynical, and it probably is. But you know, I mean, God and I had conversations like, you know, I made a freaking living doing the music you like. and you can't, you know, is it so skin up your nose that you could like turn the dial back just maybe 2 clicks on this? I'm not even asking for, you know, take up your bed and walk level miracles here. I'm just asking for, you know, some relief. And it just did not go that way. And I was angry, and I was very disillusioned. And but one of the things that comes with sobriety, John, and I tell this to my clients, and people have told it to me when I started into my own therapy with all this, is it is the most disruptive thing you are going to do in your life. When you give up your medicator and you give up your anesthesia, you're going to feel, and you're going to pay the price of emotions, and you're going to actually know what you think about certain things. And then you're going to have to decide what you're going to do about it. Things that are true about you, things that are true about your life that didn't just start when your wife got sick, and they didn't just start when you started to drink. You know, they started way back. And I'm talking beliefs and realities and all this kind of thing. And I started feeling really conflicted in the job I had. Oddly, and this is kind of, I think this is kind of a picture of addiction. Oddly, I didn't feel that conflicted, you know, getting drunk a lot and being a director of worship and arts at a higher profile church. For some reason, that didn't
seem to bother you.
It wasn't disingenuous at all about that. But when I got sober, I felt really conflicted, because I realized I wasn't drinking the Kool-Aid I was helping sell in a lot of ways. And so I got really uncomfortable in that. And that went on for a long time. And I went to a monastery for a week up in Kentucky, or just on the other side of the line in Indiana. And I spent about a week with these Benedictine monks that some people had told me about. And I did a guided retreat with one particular spiritual advisor, and he asked me a lot of really good questions, you know. And I went up there, you know, to the monks because some friends of mine had told me about it, and also because I didn't trust the evangelical paradigm that I had been living and working in forever, you know. And I realized that I had a lot of responsibility to come to terms with my truth. And I didn't have to jump on any one thing right away and make a big, you know, blow trumpets and announce myself as departing from, you know, some type of religious practice or anything. But I did need to think about it, you know. And in the book I wrote, After the Miracle, I talk about the guy that, you know, his friends lower him through the roof to see Jesus, you know. and he takes up his bed and walks. And we all love the miracle stories, yay, God, and hallelujah, and, healings. And we all love that. I believe in that. And I think it's, I celebrate that too with people that we all see suffering. But my thought about that was, he's having a holy crap moment when he has to roll up his bed and walk home because suddenly I've got responsibilities. Everybody in town just saw what happened to me. I'm obviously able to take care of myself now. I'm obviously going to have to find probably an occupation or a way to make a living. My mom or whoever has been taking care of me is going to have a new role in my life, and I'm not going to need them in the same way. So that's going to change. And there were a lot of parallels that resemble sobriety to me that I was seeing in these miracle stories, of the Bible. Jesus asking the man by the pool, do you want to be well?
Do you even want to be well?
Yeah, which I always thought was a little sarcastic of Jesus. It maybe caught him on an off day, but
Jesus, don't be cruel.
Really?
The guy's laying there, lame.
Do the best he can, And that's a huge question. Do you want to be well? Because if you do want what you say you want, it's going to come with some realizations, and it's going to come with some change and disruption, to say the least, for you and for the people around you. You've got people that you've trained to treat you a certain way, and you've got to train them now to treat you another way, that you don't need to be handled and managed in the same way. And,
wow,
all that stuff. So, I'm off on a roll now, but it is disruptive to get sober. I'm just put the exclamation point on it right there.
And I love what you said. You've trained people around you to treat you a certain way.
Yeah.
And I've believed that for a long time. We do teach other people how to treat us in the way that we treat them, the way that we behave, the way that we carry ourselves, and
what we believe we deserve in some cases.
The entitlement thing, and if there's an addiction involved, it just exacerbates all of that problem. I love the parallel you're drawing out of that miracle story to sobriety.
Well, that was the way I saw myself. I felt like, okay, this is happening and it's amazing and wonderful. But
hard as hell.
Yeah, exactly. Literally.
Amazing, wonderful, and hard as hell.
Yeah. Because what am I going to do? Because here I am in this role. I'm starting to have these conflicts, and the monk was Father Bennett. He's no longer with us, but he's a guy that is a straight shooter, and these guys had a great sense of humor. I don't know what I was expecting. I think I just solemn and, whatever. And he was very engaging, and he said, "Do you believe God loves you?" And I thought, kind of crazy question is that to ask me? I have been in church all my life.
John 3:16.
I made a living telling people, God loves you more than anything. And he said, no. He said, I didn't ask if you knew it. I asked you if you believed it, and if you believe it for you, And I said, and I literally remember that moment, and tears came out my eyes. I said, I don't know. I don't know that answer. This doesn't feel like love. And I wouldn't do this to my daughter. So you tell me, what's love look like to you? And he said, do you believe that God can weep with you in this? Do you believe that this grieves God as badly and hurts God as badly or more as it does you? That your wife is experiencing this, that you are experiencing this, that your pain took you to a place where your medicator turned on you, and do you believe that God sees you through your pain lens and not through your failure to perform better lens, And that was a shift because I had done things so right, I thought,
right.
Except for the little pesky drinking problem that I had. Other than that, And so that was a turning point for me. But in the process of that, I had to ask myself, okay, well, then what do I pray for? And I came to the conclusion that courage, peace, and wisdom are they're the three things that I can really ask. I don't know if God's this is my own personal bent. I don't know if God's going to heal the people that I love and pray for and ask for miracles for. I don't know if he's going to let my parents live to be 100. I don't know if he's going to, do all these things that would be wonderful, but I know that I can ask for peace and courage and wisdom for whatever is in that road, that I'm going to walk that I may not want to walk. Mm-hmm. But I confused a lot of my beliefs with what I wanted and not with what I could.
Don't you think we all do that, though? I mean, that just feels like the whole culture, Christian culture that I grew up in as well. Mm-hmm. Didn't grow up in a Christian home necessarily, but, have been part of the Christian culture for 45 years. So you get kind of steeped in those things, the Jesus genie in a bottle kind of doctrines, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that as I have aged, I have far less expectation in a good way, not in a, cynical cigar chomping way, although I can go there pretty easily sometimes. But honestly, I think I've learned, I'm trying to learn anticipation above expectation, that there may be something I have no even idea to anticipate that could be good for me in something, as opposed to, that it better be a magic set under the Christmas tree or my Christmas is crap.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Oh, man. Well, let's don't go there. A lot of bad Christmas memories.
Lord.
So Trisha is sick and dying.
Yeah.
And you're getting sicker and you hit this bottom, peeing in the closet. Okay, I've never done that. So
you're not
might have done worse.
You're missing a lot.
So you have this turnaround. You're getting sober. Life is not getting better. And where were you kind of in all this when she passed, and pick up from there, and how you've become a recovery coach that you are now?
Well, she passed away in 2013. And, it's so interesting because she was in hospice care at home for the last probably 6 months of her life. And we knew that she was rapidly declining. And her nurse practitioner came in one day and he said, if you have people that she would that would like, because she had been in and out of consciousness. I mean, she really was on the morphine and really wasn't aware, as we know anyway, of what was going on around her. But if there are people that would like to say goodbyes to her, people that would like to be a part of that, you need to call them and have them come today, and not tomorrow, but it's probably going to be today. And I remember having the feeling after even all these years and all those months of hospice.
7 years in the bed.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then 6 months of hospice, knowing that we've made these preparations and arrangements and all this. I said, today? And I was like, oh, no, we're not ready. We can't, it can't be today, and he just looked at me, he smiled and he nodded, and he was a retired Episcopal priest as well as a nurse practitioner. And he just said, yeah, I know, and that was like how we're, how we are always so surprised, even when we know, or we think we know what
ready.
Potentially outcomes will be. But she passed away at 10:30 that night. Lauren and I were in bed on each side of her, and she was loved, and probably 60 people came through our house that day once word got out, and it was a special, special day. In
very
the sense
hard
that,
day, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it was the hardest day and one of the sweetest days, But she passed away, and I remember my therapist at the time said, had asked me, are you prepared for the anxiety you're going to experience when Trisha leaves this world? And I said, Marilyn, I am not going to be anxious. I said, I mean, if anything, I'm feeling guilt about the relief I'm going to feel. Honestly, this is horrible. This has been bad, blah, blah, blah. And she nodded her head. She said, I understand, but this is going to leave you with a lot of holes and a lot of gaps and a lot of time. And all the reasons you've had for not pursuing things, for not doing certain things, for not living in certain new realities, a new career or this or that, that you've said you'd like to do, but you've got these responsibilities, and those are going to be gone. And you're going to have a blank slate in front of you. And you need to be thinking about what your life's going to look like and what you're going to give yourself permission to experience. And I thought, well, food for thought.
Yeah, file that away.
And
maybe not.
Maybe so. But anyway, long story short, after 35 minutes of talking here, I realized that when she did pass, I had absolutely these gaping holes. There was just so much time, and there was so much room, and there was so much everything. And I realized that I was on the wrong bus professionally, I think, and I had help realizing that. And, by then a lot of cast of characters that I had started out that job in had changed, and we were kind of on a new page, and I was not the skinny worship leader in skinny jeans. And I wasn't that guy, and I didn't want to be, and I wasn't, and I didn't, I needed to make a shift. And I had started in a recovery coaching accreditation program. It took a little bit of time to go through, and as I got into that, I realized that was really where I really loved spending my time, was with recovering people. I used to go out and speak a lot after I got sober, and I used to have a lot of people work with me and call me, and I'd follow up with them, but I thought, well, it might be nice to know what you're doing.
Instead of just guessing at this recovery thing.
Maybe there's
it's like, just don't drink. Yeah. Just don't drink. That's it. I mean, just don't drink.
The Bob Newhart sketch, just stop it.
Just stop it. Yeah.
But it was kind of like that. But I got into all that and got into a practice with some really great counselors that invited me to be a part of their group. And in the last 7 years, I have really just seen recovering people, and not just alcohol, but substances, behaviors, things that people are engaged in, and helped people either get into treatment or determine whether they need treatment or what is the best course for everybody. Is everybody going to respond this way? And I've gotten to work with some great nonprofits here in Nashville, Music Cares, Porter's Call, people that have really help guide people along and that are in the music business.
Right.
And
I think that's surprising to a lot of people, is to realize that addiction is just as prevalent in Christian music with the musicians, the artists, not all of them, of course, but, plenty of the famous people we all know and love have either struggled with that or maybe even still do, whether they're out about it or not.
Yeah.
It's like, and there's a lot of shame involved with addiction, especially in the Christian world, to admit that you struggle with pornography or drugs and alcohol.
Depends on it.
You're in, because we're professional Christians.
That's right. That's right. And I talk about that about myself, back when I was a professional Christian, because your income does depend on your behavior. I mean, maybe in politics to a certain extent, but most people can go to IBM and, get a little drunk and go home, and people kind of, say, hey, you got a little wild at the thing last night. But people in a platform in Christian music and a worship platform, they have very few places to go. And I don't know if people realize how hard it is for people in these positions to trust.
Right.
If I tell you, am I safe? If I do this, who's going to find out? All that kind of thing.
And you provide a safe place as not a therapist, but as a coach to tell us the difference between a therapist and a coach.
Well, sometimes that's a good question for me, because you get into a lot of stuff, but a coach is going to be skilled in helping you with, motivational interviewing. In other words, things that you're going to need to ask yourself about yourself to help you get permission to tell yourself the truth, which is,
we could camp out on that.
Yeah.
To get you to the point where you're willing to tell yourself the truth.
Yeah, because if you can't tell yourself the truth, you're sure not going to tell me. You're sure not going to tell anybody else.
That reminds me of an old Amy Mann lyric that I loved, and it was you've got to be smart if you're fooling yourself. I love that line.
That's a great line. I have not heard
line.
that. Yeah.
And another one she said I thought of earlier, this goes back to the 80s. Amy Mann and Till Tuesday was her group. Remember that at all?
I do, yeah.
And she said most people get by with either bourbon or God. I started to say that earlier in our interview, but then that came back to me with, that other quote. But yeah, it's so true.
Yeah.
You got to be smart if you're fooling yourself. And I think we probably all do that to some degree, but it can get out of hand.
Yeah, it does. And
so you kind of help people hold the mirror up and decide whether or not they're going to.
And then through their sober process, what, do you want to be well? But then what is it going to look like on that walk home? What am I going to do with this?
David, that is so amazing.
It's a great thing to be able to walk with people and see them build up the courage, as telling themselves the truth and others and what that's going to be and what that's going to look like in their own life, And belief systems sometimes are things that they have to confront as well. Is this what I believe?
Wow. Kind of sorting through the rubble of
what's true for me.
Yeah. What would you say to someone out there? Maybe they're a Christian songwriter or artist, or it doesn't matter, worship leader or not, but they're struggling, with a secret, struggling with an addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you start?
I tell people to find their most trusted friend if they have one, and that I say that because a lot of people with the platform don't have, close relationships that they trust. But if you have that trusted one friend that you can sit down with and say, this is what's going on with me. This is what I'm doing, and I don't know why, and I don't know how to quit. And that's a first step, because just hearing yourself say it out loud, it becomes real, and then you have to decide what you're going to do with it. And then I would say, depending on what your issues are, find the group that you can. If you can join even a 12-step group, I'm not of the belief that that's the only way to get sober, but I do believe it provides you connection and a good next step, and then get into some good solid therapy. And I don't just mean, go talk to your pastor at church. That may be fine. But I think you need somebody that really understands the issue that you're dealing with.
Right. More on even the, I don't want to say scientific, but what's going on in the biological arena, what's happening in your brain.
Yeah, because addiction is a neurological issue.
It really is. Yeah.
Emotional issue. It's all that. It's all of it.
It's not just don't do it anymore. Or just stop it. Like the Bob Newhart thing. It really is all about the neurocircuitry in the brain that started maybe even in infancy.
Right, and most of our unwanted behaviors have a root in some kind of trauma, big T or little t. Somewhere where you felt alone in your pain and it wasn't okay and it wasn't safe. And when people begin to get in touch with that, that's what a good coach or therapist can do with you, and help you identify that, because that takes the focus out of the part of the brain that's triggering all these impulses to protect you all the time, as opposed to being empowered and saying, okay, now wait a minute, that's not true anymore. This resides in a different part of my brain now, and I can talk back to it. But if I don't know it's there, I can't. I just know that, I believe there's a bear in the woods, but I don't really see a bear, and I don't really know a bear, but I believe there's a bear,
Right. So you move into that self-protection, fight or flight,
total anxiety driven,
amygdala hijack,
exactly.
I call it.
Exactly.
That lizard brain just takes over with freak out and cortisol and all the cascade of chemicals that actually releases into your system that causes your adrenaline to peak and stay in that alarmed mode.
Totally. In fight, flight, or freeze all the time. And when you think about it, it's not a big mystery that if you find something that calms that for you, whether it's a substance or a behavior, that you would go back to it
again and again and again and again. Yeah.
So
wow.
So that's what we work on. We work on causality and not symptomology. It's not, your drinking is really not your problem. Drinking is causing you problems. but it is not your problem. The problem is there's some other stuff going on here that we haven't tapped into, that you haven't been able to identify or tell yourself the truth about yet.
Mm-hmm.
And when you can do that, then your inclination to drink is going to diminish greatly, and sobriety is going to get a lot easier. But
powerful. So you have the Positive Sobriety Podcast.
Yeah, with my recovering friend Nate Larkin.
Yeah.
Author, speaker, great guy.
Very well known in Nashville anyway, and maybe other parts of the world, but for the Samson Society and kind of a men's movement, if you will, toward recovery.
Yeah.
And whatever
great
it
book,
is.
Samson and the Pirate Monks, that identifies his story through sexual addiction as a pastor.
Exactly.
In the days that he was starting to really, where his addiction was really starting to escalate. And so, we've got the Positive Sobriety Podcast, and we bring on clinicians and people with their own recovery stories, but we like to highlight guests that are doing something really positive in their recovery with their story. People that have started everything from, their own nonprofits to recovery martial arts to some faith-based kind of recovery work or whatever, but people that are reaching out into the recovering community, because addiction's not going anywhere. I mean, obviously we're all, we're all living with something, but our culture is just more and more saturated in our behaviors and in our substances. And unfortunately, I think we're all those of us that work in this area are going to be busy for a long time.
Yeah. How can people reach you? Give us your website, and what's the easiest way to contact you?
Yeah,
Should we need what you do, bro?
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. I have a website, David B. Hampton, CPRC, which stands for Certified Professional Recovery Coach. David Hampton, CPRC. David Hampton, CPRC.
I wondered where the B came from.
Yeah, the B is on my other thing. DavidHamptonCPRC.com. And that has a place. It'll kind of give you my story, what I do, what my kind of approach is, and also a contact opportunity where I'll get an email from you, and you can fill out a thing there, and it'll shoot me an email, and I'll get in touch with you.
And can you work with people anywhere, or do they have to be in Nashville?
Yeah, my certification is a little different than a licensure for a therapist. So I've got contacts and clients in multiple states, and we'll do Zoom or FaceTime or whatever works for you, and book it in hour sessions and see what happens.
Awesome. David, this has been rich. Thanks for just being willing to share
thank you
your
so
recovery
much.
Story and to catch up after all these years.
Oh my gosh, all these years is right. But it is so good to get to sit with you, John. I'm so glad. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
David. Hey, thanks for joining us on the show today. I hope that you'll jump over to NashvilleChristianSongwriters.com and check out all the resources there to encourage you in your own songwriting. And if you like what we're doing, why not share this episode out on your socials? You can find the link in the show notes. We'll see you next time.